for peaceful purposes, okay, and that we're going to let the spirits to know that we're here and to bless what we're doing, okay. So the sound of the crack sticks, and then a welcome and an acknowledgement. Okay. First of all, because I'm currently in my own country, which is that of the Gamilaraay people, I'll do a welcome to country for anyone that might be up this way, that might be listening in for us, and then I'll do an acknowledgement of the Gadigal people, which is the Eora Nation down where Tanya and them are. Okay, so in regards to my own country, which is that of the Gamilaraay, Mima Iliki, Worongomoroyo, Worongomoroyo. Welcome to this land, the land of the Gamilaraay people, the Gamilaraay Nation. We pay respect to elders past and present, and also elders emerging. We think of those that may be ill and infirm in our communities and those that have passed. I also acknowledge that our hosts today are down on Gadigal country, Gadigal land, okay, and they are part of the Eora Nation, Sydney Basin area. So I recognise those people and also pay respect to them, their elders, both past and present, and elders emerging. And I thank everyone that's giving us the opportunity to join with us today, whatever country you may be from, whether it's Gamilaraay country, whether it's Gadigal country, or otherwise. I pay respect to those, the elders of those people's countries as well. And I thank you very much for coming along today. Mima Iliji, Worongomoroyo. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass over to my co-convener, Joyce Fraser, who is in Brisbane, to open our gathering today in our true Creators of Peace traditional style.
Thank you, Kelvin, for your wonderful welcome. We recognise the pain First Nations have endured over these years and sincerely hope that through the Uluru Statement of the Heart, we can journey side by side with First Nations people to take your rightful place on Australian land. Today's gathering is a Creators of Peace initiative, one of many other transformational programs of our parent body, Initiatives of Change. Initiatives of Change is an international network of people from many nationalities, cultures, and religions who work for transformation locally and globally on the principle that change starts with me. IFC and Creators of Peace operates in over 50 countries with conference centres in Switzerland, India, and Melbourne in Australia. I started on the IFC journey 50 years ago and have been with the Creators of Peace program in Sydney since 2005. Prior to the COVID pandemic, Creators of Peace women in Sydney have met face-to-face every month for the purpose of keeping women together, connected in friendship and ongoing learning to inspire us to be the change we want to see. We're thrilled that with the invention of Zoom, we're able to reach out with our monthly gatherings across Australia and beyond, as we can see by today's audience. A current initiative that we're joining with the IFC network is our Uluru Response. The aim is to help bring respect and inclusivity to the Australian community, working alongside Indigenous peoples. The project is rolling out truth-telling and truth-hearing opportunities in partnership with First Nation leaders and communities in different parts of Australia. The warm and enthusiastic response that we're receiving tells us that Australians want this, that now is the time. We're connecting with First Nations community leaders to share their stories with non-Indigenous listeners in conversations like we're doing today. And now I'd like to perform a traditional Creators of Peace ritual of lighting the candle. This is a ritual that we do at all Creators of Peace meetings, to signify our coming together in a safe space of trust, transparency, community, and peace. So
we are thinking deeply about peace as you light that candle.
wow. There we go.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Wonderful. Well, yes, this is a real coming together in peace and unity with our First Nations people. It gives me the greatest of pleasure to formally introduce our guest speaker, Kelvin Brown. He's a First Nation tribal elder of the Anaiwan people of the Gamilaraay Nation. Kelvin lives in Inverell, New South Wales, and is father of 4 children and 1 grandchild. It's been a real treasure for me getting to know you, Kelvin, while we've been preparing for this afternoon's conversation. And I feel sure that our guests will feel the same at the end of our afternoon. So to begin with, Kelvin, would you share with us your beginnings of what land you were born, what are your early childhood memories growing up, and where did you go to school?
Okay. Morning, everyone. A matter of protocol in regards to when people meet in whether Aboriginal people from Gamilaraay country or otherwise, where possible, we say good day to each other. So I'm going to say good day to you in a sec. I'm going to say the word Yama, and I want you to say Yama back to me. That means we say good day to each other. So everyone, Yama.
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 Thank you.
Yama.
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 Thank you. Okay, now it's going to jump around a little bit, so please stay with me, and it will all be linked.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I'd have to say that we must start with my grandfather, who I never met. Okay, what happened was, well, actually, I had my mother's father here. I'm talking about. He was a white man who was living in the United Kingdom, or Britain as it's also known, and he fought alongside the Anzacs at Gallipoli. After the Second World War, he moved to Australia, migrated here, and then he met my mother's mother, and they had a relationship, and some children were born of that relationship, including my mother. Now, my mother, she's Anaiwan people, because she comes from up Walker Way, which is not far from Armidale in northern New South Wales. So that's where the Anaiwan side of me comes out. My father, he was born by the way, my grandfather on my mother's side was a white man. My father's parentage was both his mum and dad were both Aboriginal, and they lived in a part of a parcel of land just outside Tinga in northern New South Wales called Long Gully, and the people that lived there were referred to as the Long Gully Blacks. So my father was a Long Gully Black. Now, that's somewhere along the line, my mum and dad met, and at this time, my mother had already had 6 children, and I was born late in life for my mum. She was 42 years of age when she had me, so I was a change of life baby. And we were living, or mum was living with dad at that time on a property where dad was working at a place called Brybrook, just outside Guyra in northern New South Wales. So mum had me in the Guyra hospital, and that was in 24th of September 1961. Came back to the property as a baby, and for the next 2 years, I grew and developed. A couple of interesting things there. When I came into the world, everything was what you would call hunky-dory. There was no problems whatsoever. But the relationship was getting a bit strained after about the first year mark of my life. And my father started to mistreat my mother. And what had happened also was by this time I was walking. I was an I grew really quickly and I could walk at a very early stage, and was also able to understand very clearly what was being said around me, and I could talk to people quite readily, even at the age coming on towards 2 years. My father gave me the biggest flogging one day because during the night I'd peed the bed, and Mum got up the next morning and she washed the bed clothes and all of that sort of stuff and whatever. I never ever peed the bed ever again, because my father gave me the biggest flogging that you would not believe that a 2-year-old or almost 2-year-old could get a flogging like that, but he did. Mum didn't like it, and the relationship started to go down a hill a bit more. And then one night, there was a God almighty electrical storm, and just across the road from the shack where we were living in was some sort of a shrub-like tree that was about 3 meters high, and but the branches weren't very big. They're more like twigs than anything, but it was good covering them and so forth. There was a little bit of rain, but it was more about the electricity that was flying about through the air. So my father had started on my mum and was giving her a bit of a touch up. So Mum grabbed me, grabbed a few other things, ran out of the shack across the road, and we hid underneath that tree in the middle of an electrical storm, and I still wasn't quite 2 years of age. We stayed out there all night. Mum got up in the morning, went back. By this time, my father had gone to work. Mum started packing up a few things, and she said, well, this is it, Kel. We can't live under the circumstances like this with domestic violence. We've got to go. So Mum left word with the property overseer and manager that we were leaving, and that we wouldn't be there when my father returned back home. Now, from Brybrook to Tingha is something like about good 70 kilometres or more from where we were. We walked it. We didn't get a lift. My mum, was going on 44 years of age, carrying whatever clothing that she had packed for herself and for me, and with me, a 2-year-old, and we walked the entire way. So that's about near on 70 miles or 70 kilometres or something. I can't remember the exact distance, but it was a long way, and we walked the entire distance. Dad did try to patch up the relationship, but Mum wasn't going to have any of it. She said, no, I'm sick and tired of you giving me a bit of a flogging. I'm sick and tired of you also, getting older Kelvin and giving him a bit of a tap up too. I mean, she was very upset when the night that he gave me a flogging over weeing the bed. So I then was basically from a broken family, as it were. We moved in with my sister, who was way much older than me, because she was the firstborn. I think there would have been at least the minimum of 20 years between us. And we moved down to Tingha where she was, and we moved in with her. Now, Tingha is an interesting place. It's had a lot of Aboriginal people living there. At the time I came into the world in the early 1960s, there were 3 reserves, Aboriginal reserves. We didn't have a mission as such, okay? We had reserves. There's what we call bottom camp, middle camp, and top camp. Bottom camp had around about good 6, maybe 7 families living down there. and the houses were a reasonable quality, and they were like white man's houses, as it were, with a couple of humpies thrown in for good measure. But by and large, they were white man's houses. Middle camp, very, very different in makeup. There was about good 9 families. That all of the people that lived in the middle camp lived in shacks or humpies. Okay, my aunt on my father's side lived there, and she brought up something like around about 9 children prior to her tragic passing away when I was about 8 or 9 years of age. But we'll come to that too. So anyway, and then there's top camp. Top camp was different again. It was mainly just shacks and humpies, and there was about 3, maybe 4 families that lived up there. But of all of the camps, the one that had the less traction as far as engagement with the community was top camp, because there was only a few water holes up there, and that was it. Whereas middle camp, you had water holes, you had a small stream, and you could do washing in some of the cuts. A cut is like a dam that was left over after people mined out and looked for precious gemstones and so forth. Bottom camp, there was a billabong, which was fresh water that came off the creek line, which was Middle Creek out there, the other side of what was known as Sutherland Waters. And a very, very, very spiritual place, Sutherland Waters. And I'll talk about that too in my monologue. Okay, so here I am, I'm 2 years of age. Me and my mum have moved in with my sister. And mum said, all right, well, we'll stay here as long as we can. And then we'll move on, you know, when we're able to. So everyone seemed to think that you have to be taught cultural perspective and so forth. But some of it you're innately born with, and some of it you pick up just by listening to other people around you. I was 6 years of age, and myself and some of my, well, they would have been, they were all my nieces and nephews, even though I was the same age as them, because remember I was born late in life. We all decided to go for a bit of a walk away from my sister's place, about 5k down the creek line, to a place called Black Duck, which is a very, very, very expansive billabong. Okay, and we went down there to some fruit trees that were coming into season, and we knew that because we always went down there to pick the fruit at that time of the year. And instead of coming back up the creek line, we decided to cut through the middle of the bush and come out onto the road which led from Tinga down to the crossroads to a place called Howell. If you turn left, you would go towards Bundara. If you turn right, you'd head back towards Inverell. So we were going to the middle of the bush. And this was my first cultural engagement and my first spiritual one. I'm about 6 years of age, and we're walking through this scrub, this bush, and there was a clearing. And I remember walking through, or between, 2 trees. They were young, but they weren't saplings, and they weren't, you know, fully grown, but they were, I'd say, maybe a foot wide around the bole. And I walked through the clearing to the other side, and then something said, turn around. No one spoke to me, but I had this urge to turn around and look back towards where I just come from. And as I turned and looked back, I saw a reasonably tall, I'd say just on about 6 foot tall Aboriginal man, fully naked, with spears and nullas and stuff like that, standing between the 2 trees that I just passed through, and I could see clearly right through him. And he was looking straight at me. He wasn't looking at any of the other kids that I was with there that day. He was just looking straight at me. And I never said anything. I just looked at him. And so all up, I suppose we looked at each other maybe about 30 seconds. And then I turned and walked away. He was still there as far as I was concerned, but I didn't approach him. I didn't talk to him, but that was my first cultural engagement, my first spiritual one. I never said anything to the other kids. We all made it to the road. Then we walked from the road back up to my sister's place. Now, around that particular area of Southern Waters, which was the bottom end of Bottom Camp, but down on the main roadway, there's an awful lot of spiritual stuff that used to happen. Now, if we were to walk from the bridge down where my sister used to live, up towards Bottom Camp, it was about maybe 1.5 kilometres. But every now and then, we'd go up there for a bit of a walk to say good day to the mob and then come back down. And I had heard stories from the grown-ups that a spirit lived on the river, on the creek side there, that every now and then could be seen, but always from a distance. They said you should never hope to see the spirit close up, because it would be the end of you. Us kids, you know, we did ask a couple of questions, but not too many. And anyway, one day we were walking from where my sister's house was up towards the Bottom Camp, and off in the distance, I saw what was considered to be one of the biggest dogs that you would ever see. He was about easily 1 metre tall, from the top of his shoulders to the top of his head, from the top of there down to the ground. Totally and utterly black, and eyes that just shone. I couldn't describe the colour of the eyes, I just know that they shone. And we were walking up the creek line one day, and I saw this dog, and I did mention it to some of the grown-ups when we got up to Bottom Camp that I'd seen them, and they said, well, that's not a good sign, because that normally means that someone's going to die. And I said, well, it's not going to be me, is it? They said, no, you were just the messenger. You saw the beast, but nothing's going to happen to you. And over the years that we lived out there in Tingha at Southern Waters, which was about up until I was around about 8 years of age, I saw that dog 3 times. Each time that I saw the dog, someone passed away in the community. When I say the community, I mean the Aboriginal community. So here I am. In the intervening time, I nearly drowned 3 times in the same cut that was not far from my sister's house. The first time I nearly drowned, my niece, who was the same age as me, managed to pull me out of the water and make sure I was pulled to safety. The second time was I was standing on the edge of the cut, and the sand gave way underneath me, and my brother dived in to save me because I was sliding into the deep part of the dam. The third time was the same dam, but a bit further over, and this time it was my mother that saved me. Once again, I was standing on the edge of the cut, the sand gave away once again, and I went underwater, and my mother, who was fully dressed and with a beautiful little watch that she had on, dived in fully clothed, the whole lot, and saved me again. That cut had a go at me 3 times, and 3 times members of my family saved me, and it was just not meant to be. It was just not meant to be. And every time I go past it, I think thinking of that cut, and I'm going, "You never got me, did you?" No.
You must be here for a reason, Kelvin.
Yeah. I never go past there without thinking about that bloody cut. Yeah, 3 times there to go at me, couldn't do it. So anyway, it's coming on, and so I'm about 8 years of age, and we were still living down at my sister's, and Mum said, Kelvin, they called me Kelly, and they said, Kelly, old man, what's his name, about half a K up the road here, that old tin shack he's got, he owned the land and the shack and that, and he can't stay there anymore, so he's going to move in with his daughter. And he's agreed to sell me the land, the shack and the land. And he said, would you be interested in if we moved in up there? And I said, it's okay, Mum, if you want to get us a place of our own. And so we moved up to this tin shack. And then we lived there for a while. I did see some spirits that used to wander around throughout the bushland just around us where we lived in that shack. Then Mum got the opportunity of buying a white man's house, okay, that was on the other side of the creek, which was Copes Creek at Tinga, okay, and it also had electricity. It was up until the 89, we'd never used it. No. And the next day, Mum said, we'll see if we can get this house. So she spoke to the family over there and said, righto, what's your asking price? And Mum saved up the money, and the next thing you know, that family moved out and they moved to Inverell, and me and Mum moved in. And it was not long after that we found that wondrous device, television. And we had an old black and white television that we watched and all of that sort of stuff. And I used to watch reruns of the Cisco Kid and the Three Stooges and all sorts of things. But it was quite an interesting time. Now, when we moved into that shack, another cultural event or a spiritual event happened that Mum said, see that water hole just down there below the house? And I said, yeah, that one down there, Mum, the other side of that rock. She goes, yeah. She said, your aunt on your father's side was murdered there, and the spirit still stays here because of the fact that she had an untimely death. And I said, okay, Mum. She said, now, remember, if she comes here, she'll never hurt you. The spirit may wander around and visit other people, but she'll never hurt you because you're family, because she is your aunt. She's your blood aunt. And I said, okay, Mum, all right. And I did see her every now and then down around that water hole. But there was one night when my nephew was the exact same age as me. We were outside just mucking around. This was about 8:30 going on 9 o'clock. And the adults were inside talking and yarning and that. And we said, oh, we're going to go outside for a bit. They said, well, don't go too far. Right over. I said, no, we're going to go onto the rocks on the other side of the road that led up to the house. And as we got over onto these rocks, me and my nephew were looking out across the sandbanks, and we could see a light. And I said to my nephew, Peppy, I said, Pep, you see that light over there? He said, yeah. He said, I was about to say, whether you've seen it. I said, do you think it's that other rock that's down near the sand down there that that's got that white face on it? He said, that's what I was thinking. Let's go down and have a look. So we're walking towards this light. Next thing, we're going past the rock that had the white face, going out onto the sand. And as we got closer and closer to the light, we could see it was the shape of a woman, and she was just standing there. And as we got closer and more defined, I said, I think that's Aunt Eileen. And he said, I think you might be right. And we finally, when we got right to where she was, she just disappeared, gone. And me and Peppy stood there and we're looking around and said, what was that all about? And so me and him went back to the house and we said to Mum and that, we've seen Aunt out there and all of that sort of stuff. And she said, we don't know what that's about, because she normally only gets seen either down at the water hole or she comes up into the house. So we'd never seen her out on the sand banks before. That's unusual. My nephew and I went out the next morning to have a look, and we walked right out onto the sandbanks and followed our footprints. And when we got finally to the spot where she was, there were no other footprints other than ours. Me and him were the only ones that saw her that night. Not long after that, we moved to Inverell, me and Mum, and I'd already started, I'd finished up at Tinga Central School, and we were moved into Inverell, so I could go continue my study with McIntyre High School, which is a brand new high school that had just opened up. And every now and then I'd see the odd spirit that would be wandering around, and I never really thought much about the fact that I could see spirits where other people couldn't. It's just one of those things that I've had all my life. And then what's happened is that I went through high school, started to engage far beyond the people and the communities that I had engaged with before. And I started to realise that not everyone likes Aboriginal people. And that was done by my having a bully in high school who used to like to give me a bit of a touch-up every now and then. And I was only a little thing and I couldn't defend myself. But my nephew, Pepe, was always hanging around. Me and him, we always hung around to each other. He turned around and he'd say, right, I'll take care of this. And he was a boxer. So he'd give the bully a bit of a touch up and say, no, leave Kel alone. Now, went through McIntyre up until 1978. In 1979, I was down in the Hunter Valley at a farm preparation school called Tulugan Vale, which was run by the Barnardo's Australia organisation. It must have been around about September, October, maybe, something like that. We were in the main lounge room of the premises, the residence where we were staying while we were studying farm technology, and we're watching Countdown. When all of a sudden, a fierce feeling came over me that says, get out of the room. It was a very, very strong emotional pull that said, get out of the room. So I just stood up, looked for the quickest exits out of the building, out of the room, out of the building, and I turned to my left. There was a door, there was another room and another door that went out onto a grass verge just on the outside of the building. And I went through there. This took me only something like about 10 seconds, maybe 15 at the absolute most. Now, what I'm about to talk about is something that is incredibly, incredibly rare. And only people of power would be called upon in regards to what I'm about to tell you. But I tell you because it's a story that needs to be told. So 15 seconds to get out of the room. I'm out on the grass verge. I turn and face to the north, but slightly northeast. There's two ridges, one running from my right, coming towards the centre in front of me, and then there was a drop. A ridge line coming from my left of me, coming towards the front of me, and then a drop. So there was a bit of a V between the two ridge lines, and I was looking straight between that V. And all of a sudden, I had left my body and I was moving through the air. How I was able to do this, I don't know. Or at least I didn't know then. I'm pretty sure I know now why. But I ended up going through that gap, flying. And now there's a part of the top end of the Hunter Valley, not far from Murrurundi, which I can't think of the name of it now. Timor, Timor, a place called Timor. Now, I had been there previously physically, and I was heading in that particular general direction at that time that I went out of my body spiritually. And as I was getting closer and closer to the area of land above Timor, right up in the high hills of the Hunter Valley, I could see a light off in the distance. And as I got closer and closer and closer to this light, I could see it was a campfire. My feet touched the ground this side of the campfire, and as I was looking through the flames, I saw a very, very, very old man sitting cross-legged in front of the fire, just looking into the flames. Then his head lifted and he looked straight at me, and words came into my head. There was his lips didn't move. He looked at me and he said, "My time has come. I did not want to pass alone. I sent out for anyone that had power that could hear me, and you were the closest." And I said, in my mind, what do you want me to do? And he says, just be there. Just be here. And all of a sudden, all of these images, there were millions upon millions upon millions of images just flashing from his mind to mine. And what those images were, I couldn't tell you. They just flashed. It was like all encompassing. And just to this day, I could not tell you exactly how many images were given to me. And then he looked up and he said, thank you. Then the fire started to die down and it disappeared. And as the fire disappeared, so did he. Next thing you know, I'm waking up, standing, still on that patch of grass outside the building, looking towards the north. And off to my right, the words came clearly to me saying, oh, you're back. And I turned to my right, and here's one of my best mates that was also at the school, sitting on the step, and he said, when you walked out of the room, I thought it was weird the way you did it. He said, I followed you. And I said, I seen you come out here, and I seen you stand in the middle of the yard there and look to the north. I came over to ask you what was going on, but you weren't here. I kept talking to you, no response. I slapped you in the face a couple of times, no response. I punched you in the arm, no response. You were not here. He said, have you got any idea how long you were away? And I said, 5 minutes at the most. He said, you were gone for 15 minutes. 15.
Wow.
And I said, really? He says, yeah. And he said, and he said, what happened? And I told him, and he said, well, that's amazing. And I said, that's my first out-of-body experience. I said, I've never, ever had that done before. Now, the reason why I'm telling you the story is because sometimes people of power are messengers. That means that we get told things, not for ourselves, but that we then can pass that message on. So whatever that man was, and I believe he was a clever fella or a Kadacha man, and that what he was doing and that he was passing away and that he didn't want to die without that knowledge being passed on. And so he passed it to me. So within me are all of those images. They're still there.
Those images, yes.
Yeah, and every time I come across someone, and all I have to do is touch them, and those images are passed through them. And so eventually those messages or those images are going to get to where they're supposed to go. I'm not the one that was supposed to be for, I'm just the bearer of them. So that was my first out-of-body experience.
And it's a gift. You've been gifted, haven't you?
Oh, yes,
and,
very much.
You know, I speak as a non-Indigenous person that, you know, not many people have that contact with the other realm, with the other world. Few do, but few do. But you've obviously got a real connection with your ancestors.
Yes, that's because of what we call
gift.
power. And it is a gift. It is not the only time that I had an out-of-body experience, but I'll talk about that later. So what I've given you there is a snapshot of the early parts of my life up until I was 18.
A dramatic start.
Actually,
indeed.
So
And then
what's the next question?
Can I next take you to, well, you're a third generation Aboriginal soldier serving in the military. Can you tell us of yours and your forefathers' military service years?
Okay. With regards to the first aspect of military service, which was my white grandfather, who fought alongside the Anzacs at Gallipoli. Now, a lot of the Brits that were there at the time, that were fighting alongside of our guys, they, by and large, the diggers anyway, thought highly regarded themselves. They didn't think much of the officers, but the diggers, the soldiers on the ground, thought a lot of each other. And so at some stage, my grandfathers thought, you know, if I get out of this alive, I don't really want to go back to England, to the old country. He says, I want to come back. I'll go to Australia, where these fellas are from, these Anzacs. And so that's what he did. At the end of he survived the First World War, immigrated to Australia, and as I said, he met up with my mother's mother, and they lived in an area of land just outside Walker, and that country up there is Anaiwan country, which is where my mother's side comes into it. So I'm a grandson of a Gallipoli veteran. That's the first aspect of military service. The second aspect comes in two parts. The first part is my father. He decided to join up service in 1942 and go off and fight. At the time that he signed up, he had been living out at Long Gully, okay, outside Tinga, and he said, "No, I'm off." And before you know it, he's been mobbed out. He's had his training and everything else like that, and ended up in Egypt. And him and the Australian contingent, plus some New Zealanders and also some Canadians, I believe, became part of the campaign to oust Rommel, Field Marshal Rommel, and the North Africa Corps of the Germans. I command and their processes. My dad fought from Cairo all the way up through the deserts into Libya and got to Tobruk. And they fought for and claimed Tobruk. About a week or so later, they were kicked out. Germans took Tobruk back over, and our guys went back in, including my dad, and they took it over and didn't give it back. And of course, they were referred to as the rats of Tobruk, because an officer from the I Command said, "These Australians are hard to get out of this place because they're in there like rats, and it's very hard to get rid of rats." And as they come, I think it might have been Lord Haw, who was also mentioned them as being rats within Tobruk. And somehow the moniker stuck. And my dad is, or was actually, a rat of Tobruk. He survived that and came back to Australia and lived out his years here before he met my mum. There was an interesting story that he told me many years later, when I would have been around about 12, maybe 13. He said, "I'll tell you a bit of a story about my war years." And I said, "What's that, Dad?" And he said, "Well, we just fought our way through this little village, and it was Christmas Eve. And my dad had a little bit of a religious bent to him, not much, but a little bit. And it was Christmas Eve, and he said to his sergeant, he said, 'Listen, you know that little church back there in the village?' He said, 'You mind if I go back there and just say a couple of prayers?' And his sergeant said, 'Yeah, well, considering the fact that we've got the entire village surrounded by our troops, that should be safe enough.' He said, 'Try not to be too long.' Yeah, he said, 'No, go down there and say a couple of prayers.' So my dad's walked into this little chapel, this little church, and there's an old priest in there lighting up some candles because it was dark. And he seen my dad, and he had a bit of a beleaguered look on his face, and didn't say anything. And Dad went over to the altar and just kneeled down and was just thinking about home and things like that. And he went to stand up to go out the door when the priest came over, and who knew a bit of English, and said, "Excuse me, my son." He says, "Why are you here?" And my dad said, "Oh, it's the war. We're here to fight the Germans." And the priest said, "No, I'm not asking you why you're here in this country. I'm asking you why you're here in this chapel." And says, I said, "Why?" He said, "Because this chapel is dedicated to unwed mothers."
It's dedicated to what? Sorry?
This chapel is dedicated to unwed mothers.
Unwed.
and that's, the priest was thinking, we don't have men in here. This is a place for women. And that's why the priest had a very unusual look on his face. When he said, "My dad
on his face.
So anyway, that's just a little thing that Dad talked about.
Tell me, was he recognised when he came back? Was he acknowledged as an Australian?
No, it took years for him to get his medals. It took years for the RSL to acknowledge him and all of that sort of stuff. And the soldier settle scheme, even though it was given to white fellas, wasn't given to black fellas, even though they fought the exact same wars under the same conditions in the same service. But I consider my dad being lucky because what happened to my uncle was really bad. About 6 months after Dad joined up, my Uncle Charlie decided he was going to join up too. And unlike Dad, where he's signed on at Tinga at Long Gully, Uncle Charlie signed on at Paddington in Sydney. And instead of going to North Africa like Dad did, because the Japanese were starting to make a bit of a push into the Pacific, my uncle was sent off to take on the Japanese, and they got to Singapore. And then, of course, there's the infamous fall of Singapore, where the British laid down their arms, and everyone that was with them laid down their arms, purely because of the fact that some idiot in the high command said, we can't fight the Japanese, we may as well give up. The Australians wanted to continue fighting, but they were told, no, just follow your orders. Your orders are to stand down. And they did, which meant that they then became prisoners of war. My uncle was kept as a prisoner of war for 3.5 years in Changi, one of the most infamous prisoner of war camps that's ever existed.
Yes, yes.
Now, here's the interesting thing that happened to Dad, to my Uncle Charlie while he was there. As the prisoners who came into the camp, they were all brought before the intelligence officers for the Japanese and, you know, the camp seniors and so forth. You know, ask who are you and all that sort of stuff. And you came along and said, I'm a soldier, you know, I'm Australian. This is my serial number. This is my rank and so forth. Right. And then away you go. When it got to my uncle, the Japanese looked at him as if to say, what are you doing here? And uncle says, well, I'm a soldier. I'm Australian. This is my rank. Blah, blah, blah. Because he was only a soldier just like everyone else. But they said, but you're not like the other soldiers. He says, you're a black man. He's going, yeah, I'm Aboriginal. And they said, well, we don't understand that. They didn't know how to handle the fact that a black man, an Aboriginal, could be a soldier in the Australian Army. And so they treated him differently. The white fellows, they just, you know, did whatever they wanted to do and all of that sort of stuff. But for some reason, because they put my uncle in a different basket, he was treated differently. And what happened was he had more freedom of movement.
Is that right?
So where the others could only go certain places under certain conditions, my uncle could go to certain places in the camp where the others couldn't, which meant he was able to get hold of things. He could get hold of medicines, he could get hold of clothing, he could get hold of other little bits areas. Now, it was mentioned at the time that my uncle died that while he was in Changi prisoner of war camp, he saved the lives of 60 of his fellow soldiers. Now, I have heard that same story from other soldiers that were there at the same time as my Uncle Charlie, and they've all said the same thing. Charlie, your Uncle Charlie saved 60 men, not 61, not 59, but exactly 60 people. That every single time Uncle Charlie's name came up in regards to Changi, they all said the same thing. And that was because he had that freedom of movement and was able to move around.
Yes.
So there you are.
Was his name Charlie Brown, or what was his name?
Livermore. See, my father's side, Livermore's, and we'll talk about that later because that comes out of the Munros, which came out of the Gamilaraay, which is the people who died at Mile Creek. We'll come to that.
Okay.
So I've got my grandfather, Gallipoli veteran. My dad, Bradford Brook, North Africa. My uncle, Pacific, Changi prisoner of war camp. And then there's me. So it's 1979. I finished up my studies down at the prep school in the Hunter Valley. And they said, you are now qualified to go to Tokal or Yanco, which is the two prestigious agricultural colleges in Australia. They said, you can go in there now, no problems, because you qualified the study program that we've got here, and you've already got pre-entry. And I said, I'll think about it. Excellent. I went home, and for 12 months I thought about it, and I decided, no, I'm going to join the military.
Oh, really?
So I finished my studies in 79. I had 1 year where I was wandering around just thinking about what I was going to do with my life. And then in 1981, I joined up and became a soldier, a regular service soldier. I went to Kapuka, did the training and so forth. I suppose this is a little bit of negative racism, but it is a form of racism, but in a reasonably good way, but an unusual way. One of the NCOs there, for some reason, took a shine to me. And he says, because my nickname was Brownie. My last name was Brown, but they just put a Y on it and say Brownie. And he goes, I went to go and do some laundry one Sunday, and this corporal who was with one of the other, he was in the same company, but different platoon. And we'd pass each other there, and then he was down there and he said, Brownie, what are you doing? And I said, I'm about to go over to the laundry, corporal. And he goes, really? He said, well, why don't you just pull up a stump here with me and have a drink? And he pointed to the esky that was sitting at his feet. And I said, oh, I've got to do my laundry and I've got to do my boots. And well, that next thing he sings out to one of his recruits and says, recruit such a, he says, go and put recruit Brownie's stuff in the laundry and then dry them out, and then grab his boots and polish them up for him. I said, you can't do that. He says, no, you're going to sit here with me and you're going to have a drink. And I said, we're not allowed to drink. And he says, you'll sit here and have a drink. And of course, we couldn't say no. And so I'm sitting there, and every now and then one of these recruits would come up to the corporal and talk to him about such and such, and the corporal's watching him, he's giving instructions out while he was having a beer, and he'd crack a beer and he'd get me to crack a beer, and I'm scared as I'm thinking, I'm going to get in the biggest trouble here. I'm thinking I'm going to get in the biggest trouble. Anyway, after about an hour, my clothes are all dry, my boots are done, and I've had about 4 beers, I think it was. And I said, right, corporal, I said, I've got to go. And he says, right, Brown, he says, I'll see you around then. And I said, yeah, right, corporal. So I grabbed my clothes and I ran. And I'm getting upstairs and I'm shaking like a leaf. And they go, what's wrong with you? I said, you won't believe what just happened to me. And the only reason why he did that was because he thought of me as being different. He could have picked any other digger that was down there, but he didn't. He picked on me. I was scared to live in daylights out of me, but at the same time,
it was racism in reverse.
Yes, it was. So that was an interesting cause there. Now, I ended up going to Watsonia Barracks after Kapuka, which is Watsonia Barracks is in northeast Melbourne, near a place called Heidelberg, near a place called Greensborough. And what happened was that the School of Signals was there, and I was coming in to do training as a operator keyboard. And I was about 2, maybe 3 weeks into the course. It was an extremely, extremely hot day, and it was sweltering. And half the class were asleep, and this instructor, which is a female instructor, a corporal, was in front of us, and she was trying to keep the class on track, but after they were falling asleep because it was so hot. And then all of a sudden, she said, Signalman Brown, get up here. And I'm shocked. I say, yeah, what have I done? Because I was actually listening to what she was saying. He said, don't go falling asleep in my class. And I said, I wasn't, Corporal. I said, I wasn't. She says, don't lie to me. She says, get over in that corner. And I'm an 18-year-old man. In the eyes of Australia, I was an adult. In the eyes of the military, I was an adult. And here I am, being selected.
Being put in the corner.
And then said, face the wall. Stand there. And I'm there going, you've got to be joking. And anyway, she finished off the class. She said, you just wait right there. And anyway, she went off. And next thing you know, 2 warrant officers came through the door, and they're going, Sig Brown. And I burst into tears thinking, what in the world have I done? Nothing. And they come up to me and they go, are you okay? Are you all right? And I'm going, well, I don't know what in the world's going on. And I'm trying to explain what had just happened, and I'm crying. And they knew what had happened, that she just lost the plot. And instead of picking on just individuals in the classroom, she just picked on me. Why? The only thing I think of was colour, racism, bigotry. She had the entire class to pick on, but no, she chose me, and she put me and put me in a place that says, "Hey, you're not a man. You're a child. Stand in the corner. Look that way." And it shattered me. It really did. So the warrant officers, I didn't realise, and they were incredibly upset, because they knew that if I turned around and realised that I was being treated racially different, that I could have, had a leg to stand on to have that woman chucked out of the army.
Yes,
she could, yeah. So anyway, they said, look, we know that you've been doing the right thing for your course and that, but we might think about moving you to another course. And so they took me away from operator keyboard, and I ended up becoming what's known as a Storm Tech Gen, which means I was still within the signals corps, but I was trained to look after signals material and so forth, and radio.
Oh, excellent.
All that sort of gear. And by the years, I had the odd weird thing happen to me in regards to my Aboriginality. Some of it was good and some of it was bad, but the most of the times it was good. Now I'm going to tell you one of the stories that I found that was really good. So my first posting was for the School of Signals, and everything went all right there except for that one instance when I was put in the corner. My next posting was with 104 Signal Squadron, which is out at Holsworthy, the other side of Liverpool in Sydney. And while I was there, I come on deck, and there's what we call detachments, which is where there's a vehicle with a certain amount of equipment in it. That vehicle and that equipment is maintained and utilised by a group, and they were called a detachment. Okay, there's anywhere up to about 7 or 8 people in a detachment, including the NCOs that were in charge of them. And I was told to familiarise myself with the detachments and the people that were in them. And so I think it was, we call them DETs, the detachment. So I went through and I was talking to the people from the detachments, and I got to Det 3. And all of them were happy to talk to me and say good day, because I was a new chap on the block and all of that sort of, except for one young bloke who was fair-skinned and had blonde hair and blue eyes. And he sort of like gave me the cold shoulder and would walk off if I came anywhere near him. I shrugged that off and think, no, that's not a problem. Next thing you know, over the next month or so, every time I went anywhere near the detachments, if he was there and he saw me coming, he'd find business somewhere else. And he'd just come along. And if we were in a conversation, like after hours or something like that, and he was around, he never talked to me, he talked at me. And I realised, oh, he's got a problem, this lad. But he never got up and said, look, you black so-and-so or anything else like that. It was just, you could tell by the attitude, the way that he spoke, that he just didn't like me. And the only reason why that could have been was Aboriginal. Then we went out one night for a drink at a mate's place. There must have been around about 14 or 15 of us there that night, including this young bloke. And after about an hour, when we all had a few beers in us, this young fellow sort of like, it must have just got too much for him. So he comes over and he starts to abuse the living daylights out of me, black this and black that and all of that sort of gear. And I'm there going, what's this all about? And I said, I've never done anything bad by you. And he says, I don't care. He says, you're black. As far as I'm concerned, that's it. That's it. I don't want nothing to do with you. And I'm there going, well, fair enough. I said, it's going to be pretty hard because we're going to be working together. And he says, I don't care. You keep waiting, I'll keep waiting. I said, fair enough, whatever you want. So another month passed. So by this time, I was coming about 2.5 months in the unit, pushing towards 3 months. And I did come across him a few times. And then I noticed that every now and then, if I'd come anywhere near him, he'd look at me. And sometimes he'd shake his head. And then he'd walk off. And I thought, oh, he's still got a problem, obviously. And then right on, almost to the day, 3 months after I walked into the unit, I had to go and see the detachments. And I got the TET 3. And here's this young bloke. And he looked up and he seen me. And he went to walk off. He took about 2, maybe 3 steps, stopped, turned and faced back to me. And obviously he'd been some sort of internal thing within himself. And he walked up and he says, Brownie. And I was waiting for him to start abusing me. And he goes, I can't do it. I can't do it. And I said, can't do what? He says, I can't hate you. I can't hate you. He said, all my life, I've been told that Aboriginal people are thieves and liars and all these other things. He said, I had a go at you that night of the party. You never chucked it back at me. You never had a go at me. You never raised your hand to me. Nothing. He said, every time I've seen you in the last 3 months, you get on with everyone. You really engage and you're a good bloke. And he says, and I can't hate you anymore. He says, I've tried and I've tried and I've tried to hate you because you're black, but I can't do it. So here's what I'm going to do.
Wow.
And this time we're friends. And he said, how about we have a beer tonight after work? And I said, yeah, righto. And he went off and he did his thing and whatever. And then we had a long weekend coming up about 2 weeks later. And by this time, he like it opened up a floodgate, because every time I go to attachments, he'd be, hey, Brownie, how you going? And he'd come over and he'd shake my hand and that and talk to me. And he, like he wouldn't stop. And I'm going, yeah, how you going, bud? Yeah, not too bad, and all that sort of gear. And anyway, about a week and a half later, he seen me coming over towards the detachments, and he said, Brownie, can I ask you a question, mate? And I said, yeah, what? He said, I had a bit of a problem with you being an Aboriginal and all of that sort of stuff, but we got past that. And I said, yeah, I remember that. He says, look, the reason why I was like that was because that's how I was brought up by my mum, not my dad. My dad was okay with Aboriginal people, black fellas. He said, but my mum hated Aboriginal people, couldn't stand them in any way, shape or form. And he said, but I reckon if my mum met you, that she might see another side of Aboriginal people that she's never seen or never thought to see. He said, would you, this long weekend, can I get you to come home with me? And I said, well, what if she starts on me? He says, well, if she does, we'll just get in the car and we'll come back home, back to base. So anyway, we wandered off to, I think it was, I can't think of the name now, Dungog or somewhere like that. Anyway, it's not far, the other side of Liverpool, someplace that was up there. And she turned around and we walked in, and the mother looked at me with eyes that were daggers. And I was introduced to the father, and he said, how you going? He shook my hand and all that. So he says, yeah, you're welcome here, no problems. And the mother could barely say a single word to me. And I said, this is going to be really interesting. And next thing you know, we're doing, we're enjoying the long weekend, me and me new best mate, as it were, and all of that sort of stuff. And we got on and we sat down to meals, and Mum would serve me just like she served the rest of the family. And she treated me with courtesy, but could barely say a word to me. And then the weekend was coming to a close, and we were supposed to, pack up and come back. And as we were putting the stuff in the car, the mum called me and me off-sider over, and she said, Brownie, it's nice to have met you. You be careful with my son. Look after him. I'm sure he'll look after you. And she says, I packed some lunches for you both. They're there. Make sure you take them with you. And that was the most that she spoke to me the
yeah.
weekend. And anyway,
and that's testament to, you know,
yeah.
our truth telling and our listening program. You know, one doesn't know if we don't know the other.
That's right, yeah.
It causes racism. You know, if you know, racism is ignorance, and it's fear of the other, that we don't know the other.
Exactly, yeah. So just to finish the story off was that we were at work the next morning, and I had to go over to the detachments once again. And as I come over, my mate come running towards me, and he had the biggest smile on his face. He grabbed hold of me, tucked his arms around me, the biggest hug, and he says, I knew you could do it. I knew you could do it. And I said, what? He says, I was on the phone to my mum, and she thinks you're the
You
best
won her
person
heart.
she's ever met. You're the best person she's ever met in her life. And she said, and she has had a really long, hard look at the way that she thinks of Aboriginal people. And she said she would love to have you come back and visit any time you like. And she said, I thought if anyone could turn Mum around, it would be you, and you've done it.
Yeah.
And that's it. So yeah. So there you see my military service. Now, other things that I've done over the years. I'd already met one Governor General back in 1979 when I was in the Palm School down at Scone, just outside Scone. So that was Sir Zelman Cohen. I then got the chance to meet another Governor General, which was Sir Ninian Stevens.
In what capacity did you meet them, Kelvin?
Well, the school, the Governor General was the patron of the school at Scone, and when I was at when I met Sir Ninian Stevens was that I was with 133rd at that time, which was my third posting, and we were going to be doing what was known as the Princess Anne banner, okay, and that was going to be given to our corps on behalf of the Princess, and it would be given by Sir Ninian Stevens. So I met two Governor Generals there, and I do remember a number of years before that when I was at Bandiana studying stores management, logistics, and the Sir Zelman Cohen and Lady Cohen were to be there, and I kept saying to the boys, I said, I've met these people before. They said, oh, you haven't met the Governor General, you don't know his wife. And I said, yeah, I do. I do. We've done this bits and pieces, right? And we're having a cup of tea and all of that, and some bickies or sandwiches, and Lady Cohen and one of her ladies is walking through the crowd and comes up, and they said, oh, I'd like to introduce you to Lady Cohen. I said, oh, Lady Cohen. I said, we have met before. And she said, how? Where? And I told her about, the farm store. She said, oh, you're talking about Toluga Vale. And I said, yeah. She goes, I remember that. Oh, yes, I do remember you. And then my mates are there going, hey, he wasn't kidding. He does actually know these people. Yeah. And people said, oh, no, he's still alive. But no, he wasn't. No. Yeah. So, look, over the years, I suppose racism has raised its head quite a number of times.
Yeah.
Going to come to some of the hard ones as part of this journey that we're talking about today as well.
Yes.
But let's say that when I was in military service, majority of the time, if anything, my colour of my skin was helpful, but there was the odd one or two times when it was very, very bad and sad.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So let's move on to another question. And
okay. Now, I believe you've been heavily involved in community engagement, and you've created an Aboriginal health service. Can you tell us about that?
Would have been about 2003. I'm having a beer at the bar at one of the pubs here in Inverell, and there was a window that looked out onto one of the main streets, and I could hear this tapping. And as I looked over towards the window, there's this Aboriginal face there. It's a woman, and she's waving at me to come over. So I came over to the window, and she said, Kel, can I talk to you for a minute? So I went back to the bar, downed my beer, and went back outside. And I said, yeah, what's up? And she says, Kel, we know that you're very bright, you're intelligent and all of that sort of stuff. And we want to know if you can give us a hand. And I said, in what regard? She said, I'm with a committee that's trying to get an Aboriginal health service built here in Inverell. And I said, oh yeah, righto. I said, how can I help you out? She says, well, we're in a bit of a loggerhead at the moment that we can't seem to be moving forward because we need someone with a bit more intelligence to help us out. And we were thinking if you came along, that might be the catalyst that we need to move things forward. And I said, okay. She said, we'll come to a meeting and we'll sit down and yarn about things. So I went to a meeting and the entire committee turned around and looked at me and said, Kel, we really need your help. Will you stand up and give us a hand? And I said, I'm not going to lock myself into anything that I don't know about. So I said, what have you got there in regards to documentation about what you're trying to do? And so they gave me these 3 boxes that had files in it, it had documents and all that sort of stuff. And it took me around about a good week to go through all these documents. And then we went to a meeting and they said, well, Kel, what's the go? Are you going to give us a hand or not? And I said, yes, I am. And I said, see these 3 boxes? I went through them all and I looked at everything that you've done. And I applaud you for your effort. I said, but you know what? There was one document in there that sealed it for me. And I pulled out this certificate. And it was a certificate of support between the committee and the Premier of New South Wales. That said that the Premier of New South Wales, as auspiced by the Premier of New South Wales, would endeavour to assist the committee in the process of creating an Aboriginal health service.
Excellent.
And recognising it. And I said, because of that, I said, we've got a chance. I said, all of that paperwork, but you only had one document, but it was the most important document. I said, that's what we needed to work on.
Yes.
So anyway, I said, here's what's the go is. I don't know anything about Aboriginal health services other than I've been a patient once in the blue moon. And I said, I've got to go and learn this stuff. Next thing you know, I'm at university and I'm studying, and I was working down at South West Sydney Area Health Service as part of my study program. And I still had a year to go of my study program before I finally got my degree. When all of a sudden, I've been there for 12 months. And in that time that I was there, I went off and I fought tooth and nail to get Armagen created. I bashed down the doors of senior bureaucrats in the Department of Health and Ageing that many times, I lost count. I walked into the offices of the Office of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health, which is called OATSI, that many times. It's amazing. I lost count of that too. But everywhere I went, I said, my people have been dying. My people are in pain. They need help. We need to get this done now, not a year from now, not 2 years from now, not 20 years from now, right now. And I every chance that I get, and there was one representative from the Office of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health, Department of Health and Ageing. His name was David Beard, and he was my enemy because he's the one who could say yes or no to us having a health service. And every chance that I got, I was at him. Come on, we need this health service. We need this health service. We need this health service. And there was towards the end of that year that I was down there at South Western Area Health, it was a national meeting, and it just happened to be held just outside Liverpool at Warwick Farm at the resort there. So I was over there, and once again David Beard came along, and everyone said, well, if David's here and Kelvin's here, it's going to be on, because there's no way that Kelvin will come along without, you know, sticking his hand up and saying, what about Armagen? What about Armagen Aboriginal Health Service? And so he got up to do his talk, and then he opened up the floor to talk about something, and I just let him have it 20 barrels, you know, and I put it, you know, once again, very vocally about trying to create Armagen. And then he answered my questions and all of that sort of very forthrightly, didn't back down from it. And then we broke for lunch. Now, the eating area in the resort, it could handle anywhere up to 300 people. And there were 300 people in there that day, because that's how big the conference was. It was a national conference. And he could have sat anywhere, but David Beard, the representative from Aboriginal Office of Aboriginal Island, Torres Strait Islander Health, sat directly across from me, looked up to me and he said, "G'day, Kelvin." And I said, "Oh, g'day, David." He goes, "What a bad day." And I said, "Yeah." And so we just did some polite banter. And he said, "I like the fact that you don't give up." He says, it makes me feel as if the effort putting towards Harmington is relevant. And he said, "Don't stop." And I said, "Oh, thank you, David." And he finished his lunch. I finished my, we went out of the way. And then a month or so later, I get a phone call, and it's the committee. The chairperson says, "You've got to come home." I said, "I've got another 12 months to go." He said, "No, we need you home here right now." So I resigned from the South West Sydney Area Health. I resigned from the study program I was on, and I came home. And I said, "Okay, why am I here?" They said, "Because we've cracked it. We're going to get Armigen. But they're not going to give it to us without you." And I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "There's a meeting up in Armidale in about 2 weeks' time. And we've been told to attend, and we've been told to bring you." And I said, "Okay." So we went to this meeting. We did the normal meeting, and then, so, you know, hang around afterwards and come back outside, and we're going to have a bit of a yarn. So we found an empty room after the meeting, and standing there, and when a representative from the Department of Health and Ageing, Office of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health, walked in and said, "Hey, Kelvin, how are you?" And he had 2 other people with him, and everyone's looking at me, and I'm starting to feel a bit nervous. And the representative said, "Kelvin, we've decided to go with Harmingen. We decided to grant your wishes, you and your committee."
Congratulations.
And they said, and the biggest reason is the overall representative from the Department of Health and Ageing, and which is David Beard, the guy that I was always fighting with. He said the amount of passion, the amount of emotion, the amount of guts, drive and determination that is displayed by Kelvin is the stuff that we want to see. We know that if we give Armigen the thumbs up, and we've got people like Kelvin there, that it will happen and it will function. It will become a reality. And he said to his team, don't give up. Get Kelvin on board. But tell him this: if he's not on board, Armigen doesn't get it, it will go to Tumala. And they said, so here we are. You've been giving a fait accompli, okay, which is this: if you're willing to take on the process and be a caretaker manager until you get fully organised, if you're willing to stand up for it, you've got Armigen. And I looked at my my fellow committee members and I said, okay. And then within a couple of weeks,
congratulations. Tell me, Kelvin, what is that? The name of the health service? Armigen, is it?
Armigen.
What is
ARMAJUN? Armigen.
JUN.
And it means open mind.
Open mind.
Mind.
Congratulations.
And
well,
yeah, and
what a wonderful advocate and role model for your people.
I created a workspace. I got a doctor in, a registered nurse, an enrolled nurse, a health workers, transport officer, and I started thinking Armigen is now one of the most prized and most effective Aboriginal health services within the state of New South Wales. The only service that is better than us, and that's because it was the first services at Redfern AMS. So we're the 2 top services in the entire state: Redfern AMS and Armigen here in Inverell.
Right. Excellent. Okay. RMS.
Mm.
Great. Now, Kelvin, sorry, Graham and Sally introduced me to you at this year's annual Mile Creek Memorial, the commemoration, which was life-changing for me. But can you tell us when and what led you to engage with Mile Creek?
Well, I had heard of Mile Creek all my life, on and off, from conversations that there'd been a massacre out there. And that,
did you live nearby? Like, Inverilla's not far.
Yeah, it's just down the road, really, when you think about it.
Right.
Now, what's happened is that I'd gone out there a few times, not as a committee member, but just as a member of the community to visit the site. But had never really gone there on a day of the gathering. This is just independent. And then one day my nephew rang me up and he said, Uncle Kelly said, I'm on the Mile Creek National Committee, he said, and we've got a gathering out here at Mile Creek coming up, not this weekend, but the next one after that. Any chance you could come out there with us? And I said, yeah, well, I could probably do that. He said, I'll give you a lift. That was my nephew, Preston Connors. And he gets out there and we're down at the hall at the CWA. And he said, he says, I had an ulterior motive for getting you out here. He said, because I want to stand down on the committee and I want to nominate you to take my place. You'd be interested in standing up. And I said, well, what do you do? And he explained a few things. And I said, well, all right then. Not really knowing, what my role
what you were saying. Yes, too.
But I said, okay, well, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And then when we had the AGM later on that afternoon, Preston said, well, my time's up, I'm vacating, I'm leaving the committee. And he said, but I've got my uncle here with me and I'm nominating for it. And he said, yes, he will stand for nomination. And that was a number of years ago now. I'm in my second term now as being the National Committee.
And are any of your family descendants of?
Well, that's just it. The Munro family out of Tinga are direct descendants of the Wirra that died at Mile Creek. Out of the Munros, okay, there's some other family groups that were diverged out of that family, and one of them was the Livermores. So the Livermores are Munros, and Munros are Wirra. So there's where my lead-in is there.
Right.
So when I said my dad was a Long Gully Black, his grandfather, or his grandfather and great-grandfather were both Munros. So I'm directly related biologically and family-wise through the family lines back, and we came from the Wirra and they came out of Mile Creek.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now, can you share a little more of your cultural engagement and connection to country?
I have a nephew that lives down in Sydney, and he teaches cultural dance and cultural heritage and all of that sort of stuff. And I helped him out quite a lot over the years. But I wouldn't say that what I did was engage full on with him. I was just there to support him. But I was always engaging with a community to say, this is the Aboriginal ideal. This is what Aboriginal people are. This is how we think. This is what we do. This is how we feel. Our sense of belonging to family, our sense of belonging to community, our sense of belonging to land, country, the water, the air, the land, the trees, all of that sort of stuff, the spiritual belonging, everything. Now, as I said, I've been a man of power for many years. and I'd always been able to see spirits, you know, pretty well since the age of 6. And I've always had the opportunity to talk about Aboriginal people in a positive way rather than a negative. And I also talked about the treatment of Aboriginal people as well. So if I was somewhere and someone said, we need to talk about Aboriginal people and Aboriginal issues, but we need to have someone here that could also talk about those things, because it would be not okay or respectful not to have an Aboriginal person to be able to speak as well. And so half the time I'd be, you know, pointed to and said, Kel, you want to talk about it? And I'd always be there.
Yes.
And I'd talk about education. I'd talk about health. I'd talk about housing. I'd talk about employment. I'd talk about the processes of drug and alcohol and its impact on Aboriginal people. I'd talk about stolen generations. I'd talk about other issues relevant to Aboriginal people. And every time I did that, it was engaging more and more about the cultural aspect, as well as those other things that we always talk about, which is housing, health, and so forth, drug and alcohol, you name it. But in the last 10 years in particular, the cultural side of me has come very much to the fore. Just last December, I did a cultural protocol and procedure course out at Ashford, not far from Inverell, and also a sites management that was also part of that course. Now, the cultural procedure and protocol, I pretty well knew all of it anyway before I went on the course.
I'm sure you would have, yeah.
And when I was there were 2 elders that were on the course, myself and another chap from Ashford. And so the teacher not only was teaching us stuff, but he was also including me and the other elder in the program to say, hang on, we've got 2 elders here. What knowledge have they got that would be relevant to what we're studying? And we were always, you know, looked at to say, what do you know? And can you tell us about this? And so myself and the other elder, we did that. And we talked about it and we gave insights to certain things and issues. And that course cemented some of the stuff that I already knew. And it also opened my eyes to a couple of things that I didn't know. Because the thing is, no one knows everything. You might know a lot, but there will always be one element in a conversation that could talk about 20 things. And one thing out of that, push 90 into the side, and that one thing is the thing, hang on, that's of relevance. And you talk about that. And therefore, you've just engaged culturally, but you've also garnered knowledge. And so, and that happens all the time. And so I talk about cultural awareness, but more so about cultural knowledge. Awareness means that you're aware of something, but that's only very cursory. Whereas cultural knowledge means you're more aware, you have a better understanding, and it means that you're engaging.
You've engaged and internalized it. Yes, yes.
It just came up on the screen just then to say, do I have a sense of the spirits out there at Mile Creek? Yes, I do. What have I done? I've seen faces in the clouds.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a photograph. We were doing a smoking ceremony one day, and the smoke was coming up in the air, and you can see spirits in the smoke. And I also saw those spirits the day that photograph was taken. I've seen kangaroos jump through the trees, and you can see through the kangaroos. I was out there giving a lecture and a walkthrough one day, and a rock wallaby stood on the edge of the car park while I was talking to around about 20 or 30 students. And we're talking as close as 3 meters away. And this rock wallaby was just sitting there looking at us. And then we went through and started the walkthrough. So you've got that first stand, which I always speak about, and then you got talking point 1, talking point 2, and talking point 3. There's 7 talking points. But as we went through each talking point, the rock wallaby came with us. And as we were coming up towards talking point 3, the wallaby went in front of us and waited for us to get to talking point 3 and just stood there. And we're all looking at the wallaby, and then we moved on, but the wallaby stayed and then disappeared. And I said to the students, I said, Did everyone see that? And they go, oh, yeah, we saw it all right.
Oh, did
That was
they?
amazing. That was amazing. And I said, what is amazing is the fact that I have a personal totem. And that personal totem is the rock wallaby.
Oh,
Oh,
gosh.
is it?
That rock wallaby
Oh.
is a spirit,
Yeah.
and it wasn't here for you guys. It was here for me.
Yeah.
Why, I don't know. But that rock wallaby, my own personal totem, came to see me.
Yes.
And there was a day when I was out there working, cleaning up around the memorial rock itself, and there was a young family standing in amongst the trees. There was mum and dad and two young boys. And they stood there and watched me and my mates work for about an hour and a half. I mentioned to one of my cowies, I said, do you see that family over there? And he said, no, I don't see anything. And then he said, there might be a reason for that. And I said, what's that? And he said, you're a descendant. I'm not. My people are La Perouse people from down Sydney way. He says, that's where I come from. But these people here, they're your blood. He said, that might be why you can see them and we can't. And I also said, well, I'm also a man of power. And he said, that probably has something to do with it as well. So I've seen kangaroos, I've seen faces in the clouds, things in the spirits in the smoke, wallabies, other things. I've seen this family. And I suppose the weirdest thing that I ever saw, I was out there one day working with a work crew, and I came around the bottom of the hill on the other side of the memorial rock, and I seen these shadows on the ground. And one of these shadows was darker than the rest. And it was winking. It was blinking. It was just like blinking. And I'm there going, what in the world is all that? And I walked towards it and finally got to where that shadow was. There was no shadow. Nothing. And yet, from where I was looking at it, must have been about 20 feet away, I could see a definite shadow and it was blinking. And when I walked up to it, gone. And like things happen out there. Sometimes you can feel electricity in the air. Sometimes you can have an unusual sound on coming through with the wind and so forth. On days of the gathering, sometimes the wind only comes from one direction, over the from up through the gully, up over the top of the memorial, and then over the top of the people. And I've seen that many times. Yeah, so yes, getting in touch with people out there is different.
Yeah. And do you get that sense of healing and peace there in
always, yes, definitely, yes.
Okay.
There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever. When I go out there, I know it's my place, my people, and I treat it as such. I won't go out there after dark. It's not my place. My spirits are saying to me, don't be here after dark. If you're going to be here, be the daylight hours, and that's why you won't catch me out there. As soon as the shadows start to crawl across the ground, I'm in a car. Let's go.
Message do you think we need to hear for this time for Australia to go forward?
There are changes that need to be made to the Uluru Statement of the Heart, both from an Aboriginal perspective and non-Aboriginal perspective, okay? But more from the Aboriginal perspective to meet the needs of the non-Aboriginals so that it could give them more ownership of what needs to be done. But the thing is, white people tend to look at things like the Uluru Statement of the Heart and think, no, it's just a mob of black fellas just trying to gain a bit of footing and ground and so forth. And they don't even really look at the document as such. They just give it a cursory look over and nothing else. So they need to look at the document better, have a better understanding of it, talk to people about what needs to be in the document as opposed to what they believe, and imposing their view on an Aboriginal view, which is not what needs to be done. It's the other way around. It should be the Aboriginal view that should be paramount, not the non-Aboriginal view. And that also means that we also have to coincide that with the Makarrata.
That's true.
The thing that needs to be done now, remember we had a while back, they were talking about a referendum and or a plebiscite to talk about whether or not we should have a change to the Australian Constitution. Now, here's the way I see it. For us to move forward under those circumstances, circumstances, it was pushed back by the Australian government because we were taking on the whole of Australia. And that was where we made our mistake. What we need to do to make change is to do it by individual states and individual territories.
All right.
That way, as we create an impetus within a state or a territory and create ownership of whatever it needs to be done, whether it's the statement or the Makarrata or the Constitution, is if we can win over each individual state first, then go to a referendum or a plebiscite, we will get it. If we try to take it on en masse and say we want the whole thing done as the entire country, because you only need to have a certain amount of those states or territories to say no, and it knocks everything on the head.
Yeah.
But if you can win over each state and territory individually, then go for a referendum or a plebiscite, you will win. That's the approach we need to take at the moment. And the Makarrata and the Uluru Statement of Art, they are very good tools that we can use, but they do need a bit of tweaking.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's interesting.
In what way? Can you do it in briefly? In what way? Tweaking?
Well, you know, like you need to take on the point of view that everyone thinks of Aboriginal people as one people, but we're all different nations, we're different tribes. And therefore we also have different approaches to ways and means of things. And when we need to do this, we need to do it in a way that's going to encompass all of those tribes, all of those nations collectively, but also individually. That's not an easy thing to do. The best thing is to say, let's look at them individually and look for similarities and non-similarities and address each as such. Once we get all of those on board and we've created a document that takes all those similarities and dissimilarities into consideration, then we can have a document that says something more appropriate to what our needs are. And that's what we need to put in front of the government. But the government must also turn around and say, we're not going to say no to this just from the point of view of saying no.
Yep.
We need to say no with purpose and reason, and not saying, okay, no, you didn't meet these requirements, the blah, 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 and so forth. And we'll say, well, hang on. If we come up with an each state and territory and give their outcomes, what would you say to that? You shoot down the government's argument. Because, well, if the states and the territories have already agreed to it, why is the Australian government saying no? Because the Australian government should be representing the states and the territories. But if you get the states and territories to already agree, the government can't say no.